να σας καλημερίσω, να σας ευχαριστήσω που είστε Κυριακή πρωί μαζί μας. Ξέρω ότι αυτό είναι σκληρό. Μετά το Σαββατόβραδο συνήθως οι Έλληνες δεν προσέρχονται εύκολα σε εκδηλώσεις νωρίς το πρωί. Είναι μεγάλη χαρά και τιμή να συνομιλώ σήμερα με τον πρώην Πρόεδρο της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και πρώην Πρωθυπουργό της Πορτογαλίας, της Ευρωπαϊκής Επιτροπής. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή είναι αυτή η οποία αποφασίζει, είναι η κυβέρνηση της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης. Επομένως, ήταν ο Πρόεδρος της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και πρώην Πρωθυπουργός της Πορτογαλίας, φίλο της Ελλάδας, τον κύριο Barroso, μια πολύ σημαντική φυσιογνωμία στα ευρωπαϊκά πράγματα. Δύο ειδών ερωτήσεις θα του κάνω. Ερωτήσεις που θα αφορούν την Ευρώπη και το μέλλον της και ερωτήσεις που θα αφορούν την Ελλάδα και το μέλλον της. Άλλωστε, σε κρίσιμα, σε δύσκολα χρόνια, ο κύριος Barroso στήριξε τη χώρα μας στην προσπάθειά της να εξέλθει της κρίσης. Παρότι εμείς οι Έλληνες θεωρούμε ότι είμαστε το κέντρο του κόσμου, θα ξεκινήσω από τα ευρωπαϊκά και θα πάω μετά στα ελληνικά. Κύριε Πρόεδρε, οι ευρωεκλογές θα διεξαχθούν σε λιγότερο από 3 μήνες. Θέλω να σας ρωτήσω αν ανησυχείτε μήπως δούμε μια ευρύτερη ευρωπαϊκή στροφή προς την ακροδεξιά και προς λαϊκίστικα κόμματα.
Okay. First of all, let me thank you, Nikos, for your kind words of introduction, and also like to say good morning to all of you in a Sunday morning here in Delphi. Answering directly your question, yes, I'm concerned. I don't like those parties that are becoming increasingly nationalistic, chauvinistic. Most of them very strongly against the European Union. Having said that, I really believe that the issue in Europe is not so much the problem of the parties that are against the European Union, but those who are so-called mainstream parties. They should do more to defend the European Union. I think the political issue with the European Union is the need of ownership by our countries. The problem is that still today, many of our countries refer to the European Union as a foreign power, where the European Union is us. Of course, we are very different. We are now 28, most likely very soon 27, but we are 28 countries, very different. But for me, during the time I spent in Brussels, present as the Commission, but also before, as Prime Minister, as Foreign Minister since '92, the real issue was the lack of action from the parties in the center, center-left or center-right, to defend the European project. Very often, they do what I've been calling, they Europeanize failure and they nationalize success. When things are going well, it's their merit. When things are going badly, it's the fault of Brussels. Of course, that's very difficult. So maybe the election of those parties that are critical of the European Union can be a good thing, because that will force the more mainstream traditional parties to come out and defend Europe. Because Europe cannot be taken for granted. It's different from the politics, let's say, of our countries. Our countries can do all kinds of mistakes. The governments can do all kinds of mistakes, but we remain loyal to our countries. While the European Union, if there are many mistakes, there is a risk of lack of loyalty to the European Union. So I'm above all a Democrat. I believe in democracy. There are sectors of our public opinion that are critical of the current situation in Europe. So I can only welcome that they come to the Parliament, they come to our different political institutions, and that they express their views, and then we'll see. I believe there are sufficient forces in Europe to win the battle for a stronger European Union.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε, η μεταναστευτική κρίση Είναι μια από τις μεγαλύτερες προκλήσεις για την Ευρώπη, για τους ηγέτες και για τους πολίτες της. Είστε ικανοποιημένος από τον τρόπο με τον οποίο αντιμετώπισε η Ευρώπη την κρίση του 2015-2016 και τι ακόμη πρέπει κατά τη γνώμη σας να γίνει?
No, I'm not happy. I think the European Union should do more, but once again, the European Union can only do what member states give her the means to do. Just to give you an example, when I was in the European Commission, Frontex, the European Border Agency, had only 60 civil servants. So how can you control the borders of Europe with 60 people that are civil servants in Brussels? Or sometimes they came afterwards to another location. Less than a police station in Paris or London or Athens. So the European Union could not do more because there were not means put to the European Union by our countries. By the way, at that time I made an appeal because the so-called refugee crisis started during the end of my second mandate. I went, for instance, to Lampedusa in Italy, that island close to the north of Africa. I will never forget, there were almost 300 coffins of people that were trying to reach Italy to come to Europe, and they were dying very close to our coast. I was also in Zaatari camp in Jordan, a program where the Commission was the biggest financing entity of UNICEF, visiting that camp where I visited the part of the girls, very small girls, studying there in the camp organized by UNICEF, but funded largely by the European Union. And then I made an appeal to our governments to do more. Unfortunately, that appeal was not followed by concrete results. The reality is that we were very unfortunate. Countries like Greece or Italy that were and still are in the front line, they were more absorbed with the financial crisis than with the way to deal with this matter. So we need to do more in European terms. I'm going to tell you something that probably is not the more politically correct, but that's what I really believe. If the European Union wants to keep freedom of movement inside its borders, if we want to have no borders inside the European Union, we need to be very credible about the external border. It's impossible to have freedom of movement and no interior borders without a strong external border. I'm not proposing, like others, walls, the construction of walls, no. But I think we can have much more credible policy of controlling our borders because there is no political entity without borders. We have to define those who are in and those who are out. Then we should be generous with refugees. That's a moral humanitarian obligation. By the way, it's a United Nations obligation. But we cannot be open to everybody that comes to work in Europe. I'm sorry. We cannot. We have to be more selective. If not, what's going to happen is that there will be an argument for more extremist parties, for more nationalism, more chauvinism, or even xenophobia. And that we should avoid. So I'm in favor of humanitarian openness to refugees, but being a more strict migration policy. This competence remains in the national hands, but we can do at European level something more, including asking the governments that have been more difficult to share also that responsibility. And there are ways in the European Union. The European Union is a permanent negotiating process. There are ways, I think, of persuading some of those governments to be more cooperative than what they have been doing so far.
EU offered Turkey billions to deal with refugees. Do you think that this was the right strategy?
At least it's working.
It's working.
Yeah. I think the reality is that the flow of migrants that were coming through Turkey stopped considerably. And so I have to be pragmatic. The reality is that we have to have some kind of agreements with the countries of origin of those refugees. By the way, there were in the past between Italy and Libya, or even Spain and Morocco. And with Turkey, yes, why not? Of course, I would prefer that the European Union had not to pay for that. But it's true that we need their cooperation for that. Namely you, I mean Greece, because you are the most exposed to this flux coming from Turkey, and also because of your geography with so many islands. So it's obvious that Greece needs the support of the European Union to deal with this issue. So I'm in favor of more structural measures. For instance, we need to have a much more targeted policy for development in Africa. If you think strategically, Africa today has the more dynamic demography, more than Asia. There will be, not very far from today, more people in Africa than in China. And if Africa does not develop, we will not be able to avoid all those flux of migration to come to Europe. They come to Europe because Europe is better, that's the reality. If Europe was not relatively well, why would they come to Europe? But they come to Europe because Europe offers economic and social conditions that are much better than other parts of the world. So, but what we have to think strategically is to support those regions that are now in situation of poverty. I spoke with many of those refugees from Somalia, from Eritrea, that were coming to the north of Africa to Italy, but also spoke in Jordan was, of course, because of the terrible situation in Syria. So I think strategically we need to target better plans of development in Africa, but at the same time we have to have some pragmatic measures, transitional, like the ones we have agreed with Turkey. Yes, I think so far this is working reasonably well.
How do you estimate that the Brexit negotiations will conclude, and how do you see the next day for both EU and United Kingdom?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
It's amazing. A country like the United Kingdom that is known for its pragmatism, for its common sense, sometimes even political wisdom, they don't know. They are completely divided. Not only the parliament, the country, the parties, the most important parties. This shows how difficult it is to combine a binary choice in a referendum with the multiple choice of choosing a path forward. It's easy to say yes or no. The difficult issue is not to say yes or no. The difficult issue is afterwards to define yes to a specific solution. And so there was, not a very big, but there was a majority in the referendum for Britain leaving the European Union. But today there is no majority for any specific solution in the Parliament. There is no majority for the agreement that was made between Prime Minister May and the 27 other governments of Europe, because there was an agreement. There is an agreement between the 28 governments. The problem is not in Europe, the problem is in the UK. There is not a majority there. There is not a majority for that, but there is not a majority for a hard Brexit, leaving without an agreement. There is not a majority for a new referendum. There is not a majority for the so-called Canada-type agreement, not a majority for the Norway Plus agreement. There is no majority for nothing. Because a referendum is a binary choice, yes or no. But in life, we have multiple choices. What is the way forward? Now, Prime Minister May is trying now to obtain from the European Union countries some more concessions around the Irish backstop. And she believes that with some concessions, she could get the support of the Parliament. I think it's still possible. It's difficult, but it's still possible, because the alternative will be a hard Brexit. And one thing is clear, the British Parliament does not want a hard Brexit. They don't want to leave without an agreement, which, by the way, I think they are right. It will be bad for them and for us in Europe. So my opinion is that we should work with the British, of course keeping our solidarity with the Republic of Ireland, but to come to an agreement. Why? Britain is a very important country. And when Britain leaves the European Union, there will be no country more important for the European Union than the UK, the United Kingdom. And there will be no relationship more important for them than the the relation with the European Union. So it's like in people separation. It's not good to have resentment. Resentment is bad. So if we are going to separate, we should separate in friendly terms, organized, because we are going to remain very important for each other. Britain, of course, will not have the same influence outside the European Union. The European Union is one of the 3 most important economic blocs in the world. So the United States, China, and the European Union, these are the most important economic blocs in the world today. So Britain is going to have less influence, but we are also going to lose one country that is very important. It's a permanent member of Security Council, nuclear military capabilities, home, one of the most important financial centers in the world, and certainly the more important in Europe, it's London. English language that became lingua franca today, great international network. So we are going also to miss that important member. So let's work with intelligence and pragmatism, helping our British friends to find a solution, because they will no longer, most likely they will no longer be in the European Union, but they will remain our neighbors, hopefully our partners, allies and friends.
Ανησυχείτε, κύριε Πρόεδρε, για τον εμπορικό πόλεμο ανάμεσα στην Αμερική και την Ευρώπη? Πιστεύετε ότι θα ενταθεί τους επόμενους μήνες?
There is a real risk. And of course I'm concerned. I'm concerned not only with the prospects of so-called trade measures, escalation measures, but also because of the way this is taking place. It's very difficult for us in Europe to accept that our ally says that they will be able to raise tariffs on the basis of an argument of national security. Frankly, I cannot understand that. National security. Why is Europe a threat to the national security of the United States of America? This seems quite absurd. But the world today is going in a very interesting direction, we have to say. It's true that the tariffs, for instance, on automobiles in Europe are higher than the United States. It's true. But it's also true that the market in the United States, for instance, in public procurement, is much more closed than the European market. If you are a European company, it's extremely difficult to win a contract for a public tender. The Americans are much more protectionist from that point of view than Europe. If you are a civil servant in America, you cannot travel outside America without using an American Airlines, except in very limited circumstances, but you have to justify. In Europe, we are open to that. So that's why if there is a review of the trade agreement, and by the way, we have launched, it was myself who had the honor at that time as member of the President of the Commission to launch the negotiations with President Obama for the TTIP, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, then we should consider the overall relationship between Europe and the United States. And in that context, I think Europe could lower the tariffs to cars, of course. But the Americans should also open. For instance, I discussed this issue with President Obama, and President Obama told me, you know, this public procurement is not a federal capacity, it's at state level. Okay, but that's the problem. So our companies do not have the same access. If you go, for instance, to let's say, railways, one of the most important companies working in Europe is a Canadian company. No problem, they compete. But that's not the same in the United States. We cannot have the same access. So I'm worried with that. I think we should try to avoid this escalation. But if America takes measures, I think Europe will have to reciprocate, which is not good, but it has to be done. I also regret the fact that now, in the current American administration, there is a bilateral or even more precise, unilateral approach. And they don't try to solve the issues inside the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The European Union wants to remain committed to the WTO. I think it is something that is positive to have a multilateral order and try to solve our problems in that multilateral order. Unfortunately, this is not the orientation of the current American administration, so I'm concerned. And by the way, I think part of the pessimism we are seeing today in some investors in Europe, not only in Europe, also, I came from Hong Kong, in other parts of the world, is because of this possibility of trade wars. That is having already now a negative impact in business and investors' confidence, and certainly is not good for growth in Europe and in the world.
Είναι εύστοχη παρατήρηση αυτή, ότι βαραίνει το κλίμα του πολέμου, του εμπορικού πολέμου ανάμεσα στην Ευρώπη και την Αμερική και στις επενδύσεις στην Ευρώπη. Τώρα, για να κλείσουμε με τα ευρωπαϊκά και να πάμε στα πιο ελληνικού ενδιαφέροντος ερωτήματα, θέλω να κάνω το γενικό ερώτημα, αν είστε ικανοποιημένος από την πρόοδο της Ευρώπης σε ό,τι αφορά την πολιτική και οικονομική της ενοποίηση και πώς βλέπετε την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και κυρίως την Ευρωζώνη τα επόμενα 10 χρόνια. Ξέρετε, εδώ στους Δελφούς έχουμε συνηθίσει στις προφητείες εμείς οι Έλληνες. Υπήρχε το μαντίο.
Yes, I know. We can ask Apollon about what's going to happen. I'm not happy with I think we should have done more. I think the euro area proposals to reinforce the euro area should go ahead, to have some kind of fiscal capacity, to have a stronger European stability mechanism, to have, for instance, a united representation of the euro area globally, namely the IMF. There are reforms we can do. We started some of the reforms. It was my commission who put forward a single supervisory mechanism, that's good. A single resolution mechanism, that's good. But for instance, that's not yet approved a common deposit guarantee. So if we want to have a common currency, it's indispensable to have a higher level of mutualization. Indispensable. Maybe Europe needs another crisis to go forward. It was only through the crisis that the governments of Europe accepted some more steps forward, like the beginning of the banking union. That was unthinkable before the financial crisis. Today, the European Commission and the European Central Bank have more powers than before because it was necessary because of the crisis. And we created the European Stability Mechanism. That was unthinkable before the crisis. Because at that time, the assumption was that bailouts were not possible. But we needed to create a kind of European monetary fund that now exists. But it should be more flexible. So I'm not happy. I think we should do more. Nevertheless, I have confidence that the European Union has the necessary resilience to face another crisis if it comes or when it comes. Politically, I think we have to be aware of one thing that is, I think, important. In Europe, or speak about Europe, there are two trends typically. One is to predict the end of Europe, disintegration of Europe. Many Eurosceptics are always predicting that, probably because of wishful thinking. I don't think Europe is going to disintegrate. By the way, until now, Brexit has been more a vaccination against further exits than a source of contagion for Brexit, more exits. Because other countries are seeing that it's really complex and detrimental, this kind of exit. So Europe will not go into disintegrate. But I also believe that we are not going to have, at least in the foreseeable future, a kind of a United States of Europe. That we are going to have a Philadelphia moment and we declare, now we are a country. No, Europe is not a country. We are many countries. So we are somewhere between a classic international organization and the state. We are not a state. We have already some supranational competences, like the UCB or the Commission or other, where we have put together some of these competences, but basically the states, they are the owners of the project. So that's why, in that matter, I'm more prudent than some of my friends in Brussels. I think we should go according to the public. And today, in Europe, there is no support for having a kind of a complete United States of Europe. So let's respect that. Let's go step by step. By the way, that was the original goal of the founding fathers of the European community, from Jean Monnet to others, to make war impossible through economic integration. I think that we have been achieving. Today, it's unthinkable to have a war between European Union countries. That's a great progress because the history of Europe was always a history of wars. Having said that, about further integration, we have to go forward when there is the need, but we cannot go too fast because if we do it, we lose the contact with part of our population. And for most of our countries, our people are, first of all, loyal to their countries. So I am Portuguese and European, and I'm proud of being Portuguese and to be European. I'm a citizen of Europe. But my first loyalty is to be Portuguese. Let's be frank about it. And maybe in Greece that's the same, or in other parts of Europe. So it's important to be realistic about that. And if we are realistic about that, we will not avoid the frustration that sometimes I see in Brussels, that we are not yet completely integrated. No, we are going to go for a more prudent approach, but I think Europe is going to continue that way. So Europe is, by definition, incremental. It's step by step, sometimes fragmented, sometimes it's very frustrating. I was in all those meetings until 4 o'clock in the morning, time-consuming, frustrating, but at the end it works. But it works in an incremental, progressive, sometimes unsatisfactory, as the economists say, suboptimal manner, but that's the way it is, and we should be proud of what we have achieved in spite of all the difficulties.
Έρχομαι στα ελληνικού ενδιαφέροντος ερωτήματα, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Η ελληνική οικονομική κρίση ξέσπασε όσο ήσασταν πρόεδρος της Ευρωπαϊκής Επιτροπής. Είχε προειδοποιήσει η Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή την Ελλάδα για το ενδεχόμενο, πριν από το 2009, για το ενδεχόμενο της χρεοκοπίας?
No. No, because we did not know the figures. That's the reality. We warned Greece about a very high level of deficit, but let's be frank. It was Prime Minister Papandreou that came one day to the European Council. I was in that European Council and said, the real deficit of Greece is not this one. It is, I don't remember now, how many times this one. By the way, we were suspicious. And the commission, my first commission, we have proposed a regulation to give powers to the Eurostat to go and make internal audits in the accounts of our member states. But it was rejected by our member states, namely by the biggest member state. It was not by Greece. That said, this is too intrusive. We cannot give the Commission or the Eurostat those powers. It was only after my second mandate, only after 2009, that I spoke with Angela Merkel, and then finally they agreed to give the Eurostat the powers that they have today to go and check the national accounts of our countries. This is the reality. By the way, let's not forget one thing. Before the case of Greece, we already had other cases of the countries not respecting Stability and Growth Pact, including during the Prodi Commission, before me, France and Germany. But of course, the case of Greece was much more serious because it was much, much more high, the deficit, and the figures that we were receiving were not accurate. So we could not act before knowing those figures, and we had no instruments at European level to verify, to check the credibility of those figures. Today, the European Union has those instruments that were put forward by my second commission, but it was after 2009, when finally our governments gave us the green light to go with more, let's say, capacity of external audit of the national accounts.
Τώρα, με βάση όσα γνωρίζετε, πόσο κοντά έφτασε η Ελλάδα στην έξοδο από την Ευρωζώνη, στο Brexit?
Very close.
Very close.
Very, very close. It was a very dramatic moment because it was an unprecedented crisis because of its magnitude. And there were also, let's put it frankly, people in some of our countries and also outside that were in favor of putting Greece out of the euro. I was in some of those discussions, and the Commission position was always, let's keep Greece in the euro. I remember meetings I had also in the United States, in G8, in the G20, where I was defending the European Union, saying, I believe you are going to avoid Greece leaving the euro, and my colleagues were saying, come on, José Manuel, you have to say that because you are Commission President, but you know very well that Greece is going to leave the euro. And that was the position of some people in the IMF, I have to say, complete mistake, and also in some countries, including in Germany, where part of the system in Germany was in favor, in the Netherlands, of putting Greece out of the euro. The Commission position was always, let's keep Greece in the euro, also because of Greece, first of all. The Greek people, they want to remain in the euro, but still today, 71% of the people. So we have to respect the will of the people of Greece, but also because of the contagion effects. I am Portuguese. I knew perfectly well that if Greece was going down, the immediate country will be Portugal, second, and then Spain, and then Italy, and then we could have the end of the euro. I played a role speaking with Angela Merkel several times, saying why she should keep a commitment to Greece and the euro area. I appealed to her prudence instincts. I told her, do you want to jump in the dark? If Greece leaves the euro, if there is a default, look at what happened in Argentina. A default is awful. It can be a civilian revolt, or it can be a military putsch. That's what I said to Angela Merkel, because I know about her prudent instincts. And at the end, by the way, to be fair, Angela Merkel was in favor of Greece remaining in the euro. But that was not unanimous in the German system or in other countries. So yes, it was a very difficult moment. For instance, in 2011, in the G20, the famous meeting where I was also participating with Nicolas Sarkozy, Angela Merkel, and George Papandreou, the idea of that referendum in the middle of the crisis, that was, of course, extremely risky at that moment, not only for Greece, but for all the other countries. So I think we have avoided what could have been very worse, very bad. Of course, it was very painful, I know, how difficult this issue was for Greece, politically, economically, socially, emotionally. But in politics, we have always to think about the alternatives. Would the alternative be better? Leaving the euro, I'm completely convinced that it would have been much worse for Greece and for the euro area.
Τώρα, η Ελλάδα έμεινε στα μνημόνια 8 χρόνια. Μπήκαμε το 2010 και βγήκαμε τον Αύγουστο του 2018. Γιατί άλλες ευρωπαϊκές χώρες, όπως η δική σας χώρα, η Πορτογαλία, η Ισπανία, η Ιρλανδία, η Κύπρος, βγήκαν από το τούνελ πιο γρήγορα από ότι η Ελλάδα?
No. Several reasons. Some were lack of luck, may say, because Greece was the first country that came with that crisis. So there was not sufficient instruments at that time. So the markets were more suspicious at the beginning. And when we had to deal with the case of Portugal or the case of Cyprus, we already were able to have some instruments. First case. Secondly, Greece was by far the highest level of public debt ratio to the GDP, high and still is, higher than any other in Europe. The second, by the way, is Italy in GDP ratio. Third, there was a fundamental mistrust on the Greek authorities because of the figures that were not right ones. So there was a breach of confidence. And when there is a breach of confidence, that is extremely difficult to deal with, because in the Eurogroup, in the Euro area, it's a club. If when one person goes there and what he or she says it's not accurate, the others will no longer trust. And it takes more time to rebuild trust. But basically, I think the reason why it took more time in Greece, for instance, 3 programs in Portugal was only necessary 1, is that in those other countries, Ireland, for instance, there was a big consensus, let's do it. We don't like the program, but let's do it. While here in Greece, people were all the time discussing, with the threat of a first referendum, that there was a second referendum, and there was a referendum afterwards, and that cost a lot of billions of euros that were going out for Greece, and the debt sustainability analysis of the IMF increased 80 billion euros, so it was much more painful because of political lack of coherence. So it was extremely painful, the case of Greece, I know that, because of political mistakes made here, I have to say very frankly, because now I'm no longer in politics, so my level of sincerity is increasing day by day. I'm telling you with full independence what I think. I'm not representing any institution, public or private. I'm speaking my mind. There were mistakes done in this country, but also the Europeans, to be frank. The European side also made mistakes because first of all, we were not prepared for this dimension. We were not prepared. And secondly, some of our countries, I think, could have been more generous in showing solidarity. You can imagine myself being Portuguese. I was on the side of the more vulnerable countries. I was always asking the countries to do more, the richer countries. But at the end, it's like that. It's a compromise. Europe is a compromise. So I think we have to recognize that there were shared responsibilities. But frankly, the reason why it was more difficult here than in other European countries, I think it was mainly because of internal political mistakes made here.
Θα διαβάσω μία φράση σας, κύριε Πρόεδρε, από μία συνέντευξη που δώσατε στο BBC και την οποία παρακολούθησα με πολύ μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον. Είπατε, δεν υπάρχει κάτι που να εμποδίζει την Ελλάδα από το να είναι επιτυχημένη, όμως κακοί πολιτικοί δημιούργησαν πολλά προβλήματα στη χώρα. Το είπατε το 2015. Το πιστεύετε ακόμη αυτό?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's true. I think politics matter. And as I've said, the fact that there was not a consensus here had a very high cost for Greece. Once again, it was not only a fault here, there were also responsibilities outside. Having said that, I think the politics here were much, much more difficult than in other countries. In Ireland, there was an immediate consensus. In Portugal, it was difficult, but still, the government was not hesitating all the time. The government took a decision and approved that. In Spain, they had a program just for the banks, but they took a very harsh decision how to deal with the banks, and they solved it in a record time. And this could not happen in Greece because Greece was always trying to find a way of doing something else. And in that case, when we are in a desperate situation, when the markets no longer trust you, you have to start by doing your homework and then afterwards ask for a revision of the conditions, not to do the opposite. Because you are not in a position of demanding that, you see? So because there was a lack of confidence. So it was extremely painful. But I believe that with other kind of political leadership, some of the negative consequences could have been avoided.
Τώρα, αφήσατε ήδη υπονοούμενα και για τη στάση της ευρωπαϊκής ηγεσίας και για τις ευθύνες των Ευρωπαίων αξιωματούχων. Θέλω να σας ρωτήσω αν πιστεύετε ότι έγιναν σοβαρά λάθη από πλευράς ευρωπαϊκής ηγεσίας στη διαχείριση της ελληνικής κρίσης χρέους. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση και το Διεθνές Νομισματικό Ταμείο υποχρέωσαν τις ελληνικές κυβερνήσεις να ψηφίσουν εξαιρετικά σκληρά μέτρα λιτότητας, να μειώσουν τις δαπάνες και να αυξήσουν υπέρμετρα τους φόρους. Δεν ευθύνονται, κατά τη γνώμη σας, για τη βαθιά ύφεση της ελληνικής οικονομίας και για τις δραματικές επιπτώσεις, κάνατε ήδη κάποιες αναφορές, που είχε αυτή η ύφεση στην ελληνική κοινωνία?
I already replied partially to that issue. Of course, there were shared responsibilities. Having said that, you have to understand why this happened. Let me tell you a story. Now I can be more precise. When this crisis came, I was speaking almost all the time with Angela Merkel because being the leader of the biggest economy, of course, the role of Germany was critically important. And I was asking her to put more money so that the markets could believe that we were going to react and that they should not continue to bet against the bonds of the more vulnerable countries, against Greece, Portugal, Ireland, but to somehow also Spain and Italy. Say, it was, I don't know if you remember the debate about the bazooka. So we need a strong bazooka to convince the markets that they will not win and that the euro will remain a strong currency and that Greece is not going to leave the euro area. And with Merkel, I speak always in English because my German is not sufficiently good, and so, and also she does not speak Portuguese, I have to say. So I speak in English, and I was using a sound bite. Angela, the more you delay, the more you pay at the end. And her answer was very instant. She said, I know, but I cannot do more now. Because in Germany, the understanding at that moment was that there should be no bailouts, that bailouts were against the treaty. And so it was also the opposition. She wanted to do something, I have no doubts about it, but she was, for instance, very concerned with the position of the Constitutional Court in Germany, the Karlsruhe Court. And so her argument could not be, I'm doing that to support Greece. Her argument could be an ultima ratio argument, I'm doing that to save the euro. And then she was able to do it later. From that point of view, yes, there was a responsibility. I think we should have done much more before. Myself, I was always asking the creditor countries to extend the maturities, to lower the interest rates. And by the way, we have obtained that. Greece has received around, I think I'm correct, 240 billion euros of loans in concessional terms, much better than the IMF conditions. Money coming from the European Union countries. It's a lot of money, 240 billion euros, with concessional conditions, and with some maturities extended. So the Commission was on the side of trying to ease the conditions, but you see, the same way you here in Greece have this pressure for more solidarity, the same happens in my country, in Portugal, or in Ireland. On other countries, the creditor countries, for instance, Germany or the Netherlands, it is exactly the opposite. The pressure of the public is to be more strong, more strict, more responsibility. And that is the difficulty of Europe, because we have to find at the end some kind of compromise between, and I was saying that all the time, it was my mantra, solidarity and responsibility. So it was extremely challenging issues where I believe we all have some responsibility.
Θα χρειαστώ μόνο 5 λεπτά ακόμη. 4 με 5 λεπτά παρακαλώ, επειδή βλέπω ότι ο χρόνος μας τελειώνει. Αλλά λέω και προς τη διοργάνωση του συνεδρίου ότι οι 2 τελευταίες ερωτήσεις θα δώσουν απαντήσεις που θα παίξουν στα δελτία ειδήσεων. Επομένως, νομίζω ότι θα μου δώσετε τα 5 λεπτά. Σύμφωνα με το πλαίσιο για την επιτήρηση της χώρας μετά την έξοδο από τα μνημόνια, η Ελλάδα υποχρεούται να επιτυγχάνει εντυπωσιακά υψηλά πρωτογενή πλεονάσματα τα επόμενα χρόνια, για την ακρίβεια τις επόμενες δεκαετίες. Μπορεί να ανακάμψει με αυτά τα πλεονάσματα? Μήπως ήρθε η ώρα να συζητήσει η Ευρώπη ένα νέο μείγμα πολιτικής για την Ελλάδα με χαμηλότερα πλεονάσματα και με λιγότερα φορολογικά βάρη?
Look, Greece is now in a very delicate political moment. We are going to have elections. The times before elections are always dangerous from these kind of problems.
Yes.
Because the temptation of the governments is to spend money to gain votes. Let's be frank about that. That explains why the Commission today is a little bit nervous about what's going on in Greece. So, when a new government comes, whoever comes, I think the first thing to do is to really show commitment to reforms. And only afterwards ask for new conditions. That will be my advice. And I know that from experience. One of the mistakes that was made sometimes was, okay, now we have a new government, we are going to ask European Union better conditions. That is not going to convince the other partners. It's better to show, no, we are serious about making those reforms that the country still needs, and then when we have that goodwill, there will be conditions, I think, and at least I wish that those conditions that are today could be more flexible. And I think it's possible. But not to start with that point. That should come after showing the commitment of the new government for further reforms, further liberalization, further privatization, more investment, and more business-friendly measures. Because Greece can perfectly attain more important levels of growth. I think the future for Greece is a positive one. I really believe that. But I will not start again to put in question all the... That will not be my advice, frankly. And I know what I'm saying because of the experience in the European Union. My point is, first let's do the homework and then gain the necessary goodwill to obtain better conditions. And I hope that European Union members, the other euro area members, will be able to understand this and to show a stronger solidarity to Greece.
Κλείνω. Τελευταίο ερώτημα. Κύριε Πρόεδρε, εσείς πρωταγωνιστείτε στην πολιτική και στην οικονομική σκηνή της Ευρώπης για πολλά χρόνια. Είστε σε πλήρη επαφή και όσμωση και με την πολιτική και με την οικονομική αγορά. Πώς βλέπουν την Ελλάδα σήμερα οι αγορές, όπως έχουμε μάθει να τις λέμε έτσι γενικά και αόριστα? Και με βάση το πώς μας βλέπουν, είπατε, δώσατε ήδη ένα πρώτο στίγμα, αλλά πιο συγκεκριμένα, τι πρέπει να κάνει η χώρα για να προσελκύσει επενδύσεις?
I think today the markets are much more confident on Greece. Why? For 2 reasons. One is that because the current government has changed the policy, the initial policy. That was a complete disaster, to be frank. So it was not the government that has changed European Union policy, it was the government that has changed the minister, basically. Okay, and things today are much more, let's say, reasonable than before. Having said that, and I'm going to be very frank, I think the markets are already pricing in a possible victory of Mr. Mitsotakis. The markets are expecting that to happen. And that explains why there is more confidence about the future of Greece. For me, it's quite clear. We see that. Having said that, this is not sufficient, because once again, Greece is not very happy. It was not very good what's happening, because today we have some issues with Italy. So Greece has lost those last 2 years that were very important, because in those last 2 years, Europe was growing above prediction. And now, unfortunately, I think this year, Europe is not going to grow a lot. So in terms of external demand, it's not going to be as strong as it should be. Because we see that Greece now is going to the market for the public bonds, and it's able to place, and that's good. So there is already a market for bonds, but the price is still high, relatively high. It could be less if there were not, meanwhile, other problems. Having said that, the markets are confident in terms of the capacity of Greece now to fulfill its commitments, so it's better than before. And so the markets are very pragmatic. They think the situation was so bad that now it can only go better. That's the reality. That it can only go better, either with this current policy or with a policy that is even more, let's say, in the direction of reforms and friendly reforms. Those reforms have to be done. Some of them are also common with my country. For the justice system, it's fundamental, because for business confidence, when we have a slow justice, people don't invest so much. So I think it's extremely important that the Greek authorities, whoever wins the next elections, commits to further reforms, because there is no reason, as I said before, why Greece cannot be growing more, and to give the prosperity to these people that these people of Greece deserves. And let me just conclude with a point. I think Europe has a great debt to Greece. Europe has a political debt to Greece, because in the most difficult circumstances, the Greek people has shown its commitment to the European Union. And that is a very important capital that you have to show to the other countries of Europe that you deserve the solidarity to help the growth and the prosperity that this country deserves. I thank you very much for your attention.
Πρόεδρε Μπαρόζο, σας ευχαριστώ θερμά. Ήταν τιμή, μεγάλη τιμή για μένα να συνομιλήσω μαζί σας. Ευχαριστώ θερμά.